Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're here. We're back at it again with another off-season review. This time, we are focusing on the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? So their season last year obviously was one of quote-unquote growing pains. But obviously, coming off the title year, they had this funny stretch where in the beginning of the year, right, no J-Dub, they went, 24-1 or 23-1? They had the crazy beginning to the season. And we're kind of thinking, oh, wow, oh, snap, they might actually reach the all-time streak in wins. And then they have some of the other stuff going on with the injuries. And then they just they don't play as well after that. They still finished with 64 games. They just didn't get to the 73, 74 rank that we thought that they might. Neither of us picked them to win the title last year, but we did think that they would still be really good. And that was mostly not because we didn't think they were good or because they were a fluke. It was more so just, well, we kind of had already seen that nobody had gone back to back. So it's chances of them going back to back was not as high, although it felt like it was higher than it could have been for other teams. But of course, we know what happens. They breeze through the first two rounds. And then in the conference finals, right, they lose in 7 to the Spurs, right, in that matchup that was considered to be an epic Western Conference Finals matchup. Now, a number of the games were beatdowns. But for OKC, it was tough. In fairness, right, you didn't have J-Dub except for 1.25 games, essentially, right? He played game 1, and after that, I think he got hurt in game 2. Didn't see him again until game 6, but he wasn't really himself. And that was kind of the case for a lot of the season. So for OKC this offseason, this one was one of change, particularly because they did move on from a number of guys who had been parts of their team, right? Lou Dort is probably the biggest one of the guys they moved on from because he was actually a starter and actually played well for them the season before when they won the title. They traded him to Atlanta. All the guys that they moved on from, they didn't get anything back except for second-round picks, right? They traded away Lou Dort, they traded away Isaiah Joe, and they traded away Aaron Wiggins, right? Wiggins and Dort are in Atlanta, and Isaiah Joe is in Detroit. So those are big departures for them just because of, again, you had one guy who was a starter for their title team, and then the other guys were depth pieces, where any given night they could play 20-plus minutes in the regular season. Even Wiggins in the playoffs, the finals run, right, had some moments, right? Joe, not quite as much in the postseason. But of course, they also re-signed Isaiah Hartenstein to, basically a longer term deal, right? 3 years. Apparently, it's supposed to be one that they can renegotiate on at different points, right? Where it'll be OKC could decline his option, or he could accept his option, right? So there's a lot of flexibility there. You don't usually see deals like that, but it is key, right? Just because he was an important part of their team. 3 years, $75 million. Right, he helped kind of change their build because you gave Chet Holmgren another big to play next to, because it seems like they're not very comfortable just having him as the lone center, right? And honestly, in that Spurs series, I can kind of understand why. So the key thing for them was they added a number of players in the draft, right? They added Bennett Sturtz, 16th overall, drafted Adai Mara, number 12th. That was their highest draft pick. And then Otega Owe, and then I think Josh Dix was undrafted. So they drafted 3 guys, 2 in the first round, 1 in the second round. So these are the new guys that'll be coming in to see if they can potentially replace some of the guys that they sent out. So it's kind of interesting from OKC's perspective, and that a lot of the newer players they brought in are ball handlers, right? Not Mara necessarily, but say they swapped out Dort, Joe, Wiggins, more so finishers, right? But over the last year, they brought in Nikola Topic. They brought in Jared McCain, right? AJ Mitchell's been elevated right into a bigger role. Obviously, they drafted Bennett Sturtz as well. So that's going to probably change some of their core identity on the offensive end, right? And in some ways, I can understand it because you can kind of see, especially come playoff time, there's a ceiling at times, or there's a floor to OKC's offense that when they get to that level, it becomes a lot harder for them to be able to find ways to win games, right? I mean, to be fair, yeah, they won the title 2 seasons ago, and then they got to the conference finals last year. But just some of their lowest points in the playoffs are the games where it's not much else is happening outside of SGA. And then obviously when you don't have J-Dub at all, then it's even worse. So now you got some more ball handlers, more shot creators, right? Kason Wallace is probably going to be elevated into a starter. They haven't extended him yet, but that'll probably happen whether or not it's this summer or next summer. So, with that being said, what do you think of OKC's decisions thus far? Because, for a team where they lost in the conference finals, very close to making it to the finals, and you could make the case that we were really close. So did we really have to do a whole lot? But at the same time, they also saved 300 plus million in luxury taxes to prevent them from being in the second apron. And, they're also saying to themselves, let's get a new look at, or let's get more of a look at some of these new guys coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm probably on the A minus A
Mhm.
in between the two, kind of fluctuating because I think we do have to acknowledge they might have gotten worse, but not
Mhm.
to the point where it's like, yeah, this team is garbage, or it's not like drastic changes. It's more so they sacrifice proven depth for unproven depth with high upsides, if that makes any
Mhm.
kind of sense, right? And I think the re-signings were great. I think the Hartenstein re-signing, great. Kenrich Williams, that's another great signing as well. That's classic, typical Oklahoma City stuff. But I think where people kind of start to get, I don't want to say split, but maybe split, is on the Lou Dort thing, and then trading like other finishers like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins maybe as well. It really just depends on how much you like those players and how much you think their value was to that team. I really think it's subjective in that
Mhm.
aspect, but I'm fine with letting Lou Dort go, letting Isaiah Joe go, Aaron Wiggins as well, because truthfully, you have guys like Caruso, and then Kasan Wallace is there as well, where it's like next man up. Nikola Topic, unproven, but still has a heck of a potential, to be one of their guys as well. And then also the draft as well. I think they hit on everybody in the draft. I wasn't too high on the Mara pick. I kind of want
Mhm.
to see more of that because I thought he might be a little too slow for their play style, but we'll see what happens. I guess they're trying to have a direct counter to Wemby, but I don't know if a 7'3" guy who's not super agile or mobile is the
Mhm.
best counter for that, but we'll see. I mean, something's got to be done because I think they kind of got exposed, I think, in the postseason, albeit they weren't, super healthy. It's just like, Chet needs some help down there as well, with Hartenstein. So they just need different looks, and maybe Mara can give them that. But, Bennett Sturts, I think that's great. But I think the main thing that you have to give them credit for is the financial flexibility aspect. And I think that's where, Sam Presti does, all these Sam Presti things. So, I think they're not waiting to make these ugly decisions. They're kind of getting ahead of those things prior to, so they don't necessarily have to pay everybody, and they could just kind
Mhm.
of have this constant rotation of, all right, you were a great vet, you got us what we wanted, and now we can kind of let you go because we have a next man up. So they aren't sacrificing any of their three stars or anything like that. There needs to be no shakeup. I don't want to hear any Chet Holmgren trade talks, none of that, right? Just continue to sacrifice the role players who are, collateral in, this whole thing. Because if you look at their depth chart now, it's honestly not bad. Like, it's really still an elite roster. It's just probably not as good as you would think maybe in terms of the title year, just because
Mhm.
we're going off of what has been proven versus potential here. But I think this one has a little bit more potential in terms of firepower on offense, which I think is a right shift to take because, like you said, it's kind of been Shea or nothing this past year mainly. But hopefully
Yeah.
J Dub can be healthy. But I really do like the trio of Shea, J Dub, and Chet, and I think that's the thing that matters is keeping those guys intact, and you can just build around them for as long as they're on the team.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you, right? I had it at a B plus, but
Oh
like
wow, okay.
basically, but basically like in the same vein of like, yeah, like you're making a bet on like all these new guys that we're bringing in, right? Hopefully, at some point, we'll make up for what we lost. Because like you said, like Lou Dort did not have a great year last year. I said that when they traded him, and we talked about it, right? Where he didn't have a great year. He had a horrible postseason for the most part, especially on the offensive end. But he was a guy that was able to start and play minutes for them the year they won the title, right? And like I said, Wiggins and Joe, as they got deeper into the playoffs, they didn't give you as much, although Wiggins gave them a little bit in some of the finals games. But, this year, he didn't play much for them in the postseason at all. And then neither did Isaiah Joe. Like I said, they kind of elevated some of those other guards that they brought in, like Jared McCain or AJ Mitchell, that was elevated into the lineup. So now that's what I think the hope is that okay, maybe we can be a more dynamic offensive team in the postseason with all these ball handlers while still being really good on the defensive end. The defense may look a little bit different, right? Because without a Lou Dort, right now you need another guy ideally who can guard some of those bigger, more physical on-ball shot creators, right? Like a Luca or like a Jalen Brown or even like a Kawhi or just like somebody in that mold, right? Just somebody who's like a bigger ball handler who can play physical, use their size to kind of overpower some of the smaller OKC defenders. Because that could be a problem for them in some of these matchups, right? Even like the Spurs matchups, right? Where it's like we have multiple guards that can attack downhill and just overpower some of OKC's smaller defenders. And that was an Achilles heel for them once they got into that matchup. Like you said, and like I mentioned, right? J-Dub wasn't entirely there. So that plays a role as well. And that's also the other thing is like you're now clearing the way for those are our three guys. And so ideally, those are the guys that the bulk of the money is going to be going to. And now we just have to kind of have guys around them, right? And just bring guys in and out depending on what picks we have. And, like Mara, we saw in the Summer League, like you mentioned, he didn't really look that impressive. He looked like a guy that was 7'3", right? Like you would normally expect a guy that's 7'3" to be slower, not as vertical, right? He looked more mortal, right, than say some of the other 7'3" guys
Right.
that we've seen in the last few years, right? So he could be maybe a project. Now, to be fair, maybe he'll look better playing next to OKC's main guys, right, compared to like their summer league players. But the good news is like you still have Chet, you still have Hardenstein, you even have J Dub, or J Will, excuse me. So you have other bigs who will probably play over him anyway. So worst case scenario, you can maybe just plug him into certain matchups and see what it looks like. Curious to see if Sorber plays at all, just because he tore his ACL last offseason. So will he be ready to play when the season goes? Who knows? Because I don't think we've gotten too many updates about that. But it will be something to watch because I do think OKC on paper, just by getting rid of the depth, like you said, probably a little bit worse, mainly for the regular season, right?
Hmm.
Because like now you're not going to probably have as much depth for when some of these guys are out, where it's like the games were like, oh, there's no J Dub, there's no Shea, there's no Chet, and then like they still won those games in the past. Maybe that's a little bit more difficult now, but like I said, it does help to have some of these other ball handlers like an AJ Mitchell, Jared McCain, and then we'll see what some of these other guys can do. Because even Sturts, right? He was okay in the summer league, but how much did he look like? Did he look like he could be ready to play for them day one? Like I said, I'm not sure. So because summer league sometimes is a little bit tricky to pick up on. So they didn't do anything that I really didn't like, but the Dort one is a tricky one just because he was a guy for them in the playoffs, but just didn't have it this year. But they also felt like we couldn't be in the second eight. So, and that's something that you have to accept with a lot of these teams, which kind of changes the window for a lot of these groups, right? Because say like for a San Antonio, they didn't have to get rid of anybody because
Hmm.
they're not in that realm yet. OKC is now in the realm where now they have to start moving on from some guys, but you ideally don't want to move on from any of your big three, as you mentioned. And, to be fair, like this is a big year for Chet as well, right? Because the thing that's rough for him was he was very good in the regular season, right? I think we both had him on the All-Star team. He was I think he was first team all defense. And then to be honest, playoff wise, in the first two rounds, I remember we talked about it like where he played really well. I think in the first two rounds, he pretty much gave you 20 and 10, like 60 from the field, almost 40 from three. So, I mean, you're talking about some really good stats there, right? Like, I think the first round, he averaged 17 and 8.5. And then in the second round against the Lakers, he put up 20 and 10. But then when you get into that conference finals, that's where it gets really ugly. He averaged 10.7 boards. And then of course in that game 7, it was a nightmare, right?
Hmm.
I mean he had it was really bad.
Yeah.
Actually, if we go and look at the numbers right now, might as well pull them up. He had 4 points, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He took 2 shots in 33 minutes. That's just not good enough, particularly like in a game where there was no J-Dub. That was bad. That was
Yeah, you got to
that's like
step up and be the number
yeah,
2.
right. And I get like he's kind of in that tier where it's like he's a big, but he's not really like an elite shot creator, right? Like kind of like some of the other centers where it's like he kind of has to play off of other guys. He can't necessarily just put the ball on the floor and get his own shot whenever he wants because most bigs can't really do that, right? It's only a handful of centers that can do that. But
I have to
you need
disagree. I have to disagree. I think he can.
okay,
I honest,
okay.
and I'm not saying it like to, be in direct opposition of you. It's just I've seen him do that at other levels of the game, and I get it. The NBA is the pinnacle, but there's also been stretches I've seen him put the ball on the floor, create in the mid range, and get to his bag work. He has a bag. I just think in the game 7, it was a mental thing for sure. But that's what the offseason is for. Get better, bro. Honestly, and I'm not saying
Would
that
you
to
compare
disrespect him.
Would you compare it to like kind of like an Evan Mobley, where it's like he can put the ball on the floor, and occasionally get his own? I mean, even AD, at his peak, can do
Yeah,
that at different points. They just couldn't do it with like the same level of consistency as like a guard.
right.
And
It's
so,
too inconsistent. That's the problem.
right.
The flashes
So,
are there, but then, when he doesn't do it, it looks really bad.
right. And the main thing is without J-Dub, it stands out even more
Oh yeah.
because that's kind of what we talked about, where it's like, okay, now you just don't have enough other shot creators outside of Shea, where it's like, we need you to save us, Chet. You got to do something, Mr. Cheddar. And then it just didn't work out in that game. But it just sucks because, like I said, prior to that series, he was very good. He looked like he was on the up and up as like, oh, could this guy be one of like the top 3, 4 bigs in the league or something, like, maybe that's bar too high, but it looked like that just based off of how well he was playing. I get that the front courts for those other teams weren't quite the same. There's no Wemby on Phoenix or LA, but still, just it's a rough one. But I think I'm hopeful that he can bounce back and fix whatever that was. I get that like he's not necessarily known as like a very physical guy, but I just think if you get a better version of Chet against the Spurs, you like that becomes a much more winnable matchup because I mean like it wasn't like he was great in in the other games. I mean, you heard me read out the numbers. He had a pretty underwhelming series. I think he had maybe like one decent game, right? I want to say like maybe it was game 5, 6, one of those
Hmm.
two, somewhere around that realm. But just in general, like that's a guy where you look at like, yeah, that's gonna have to improve. And I think it will, but if it doesn't, right, then that's like you said, where you have to entertain some of the other stuff. But I don't think you have to worry about that yet. Because the thing about OKC is, to be fair, they're still young. It's not like this is an old team. Obviously, they have a couple of guys that are in their 30s now, but it's very few, right? It's Caruso and Kenrich Williams. Everyone else is even like Shea is like what 27, 28, so like just entering his prime.
Hmm.
But you still have guys like J-Dub is 24, right? Chet Holmgren is 23. So like you have a lot of guys that are still pretty young that should be able to get better. Case and Wallace, the guy that we're assuming is going to take over Lou Dort's place defensively, he's 22. So there should be an expectation that there should be some internal development and growth from some of these guys. And if you can get that, then they'll still be very dangerous. I mean, like I said, regardless of losing Lou Dort, there's still going to be a major problem in the playoffs. I just think the regular season is probably where it'll look a little bit worse just because you don't have quite as much depth. But I think they're still going to be one of the 3 best teams in the league next year,
For
you
sure.
know?
Yeah, and
And
I think their offseason grade, like, probably, well, at least from my perspective, it kind of reflects in that sense of like you were talking about. They're going to be a top 3 team because I think they had a better offseason than the Knicks and the better offseason than the Spurs, honestly. But it honestly just depends on what the regular season looks like because I think that's what's really going to be make or break for them because we already know that they're going to be a beast in the playoffs.
yeah, exactly. And that's really the case, right? Just because, we kind of had it set for like, okay, it's OKC and San Antonio, right? Which one of them wins? And then, if OKC gets to the finals and maybe closes it out over the Knicks, right? Then that kind of puts them in another territory. But now they're kind of caught like in that tier of like, yeah, nobody's been able to go back to back, but they still have a championship caliber roster. And I think the main question is when you look at the Western Conference, outside of the Spurs, how many other teams also got better enough to make you feel like yeah, OKC is going to be in potentially even more trouble, right? Like San Antonio is still the biggest threat out there for Oklahoma City, but are there other teams? And I guess we'll talk about them once we get to their individual offseason. But how many of these other teams if in the West should scare you if you're OKC outside of the Spurs?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, because that's the problem. Because I don't really feel like a lot of these other Western Conference teams are significantly better
like
than they were
i-
before.
if I'm Oklahoma City, I'm
Hmm.
not like we can go down the list honestly of like
Right.
last year, right? I'm trembling over San Antonio, obviously,
Right.
because they just did them horribly. Denver, not so much.
Right.
LA, not so much.
Right.
Houston, absolutely not.
Okay. All right.
Minnesota, maybe. Minnesota, maybe. That's the only one
I
that kind of scares me just because Ant Ant is gonna scare me, and maybe the threat of LaMelo as well. But
yeah.
outside of
Assuming
that, no, nobody
that's
else.
and that's the problem where like if I'm OKC, I get that like we talked about, they probably got a little bit worse on paper because you got rid of like you mentioned proven talent, but they should still be good enough to me that they should not be if they're healthy, they should not be overly concerned about potentially getting knocked off by anybody in the West other than San Antonio. Now, could somebody come out and surprise us? Sure, right? Cuz the Spurs did that. Right? It wasn't like going into last season we all picked the Spurs to be as if OKC doesn't come out of the West, who's the next team up? Nobody was picking San Antonio. Even people who were really high on the Spurs, right? There were people who were definitely way higher than us on the San Antonio Spurs going into last season, but none of them were picking the Spurs to make the finals. Maybe they thought they might be like a 50-win team or something around that, but not like a championship contender, possible title favorite. Like nobody was thinking that. But I don't necessarily know if I see a team in the Western Conference like that right now that's going to jump out and surprise me. But that's the thing about the actual season is there are games to be played, so there will be teams where we'll actually learn, okay, maybe there's more to this team than meets the eye, right? Maybe a team like the Sacramento Kings might be better than we thought. Probably not, but uh either way, looking at their over under for Oklahoma City, 60 and a half. So I actually am gonna go with the under, like
Oh,
the Spurs,
okay.
only because I'm gonna keep with the theme of I think with some of these other teams next season that should be better and not tanking, I think that you could have lower win totals at the top than maybe in the past, and I think that combined with OKC probably not being as deep makes it probably like a lesser win total than before, but it's not going to change my view of like, do I still think OKC is like one of the top teams in the league? But I could also see them obviously going over because like they just did it the last two seasons, right? They got 68 2 years ago, 64 last year. So could they still be a 60-win team? Absolutely, right? But I had the Spurs and OKC under, but it wouldn't surprise me if they hit the over. And the one that I feel like could really hit the over might be the Spurs, just because of what they added. Like it's the same team, plus they added Tobias Harris.
Oh, yeah, you're
I
right.
know,
Uh,
but you know what I mean.
I know what you meant. It's just funny Tobias Harris stuff. Um,
Yeah,
I'm gonna go over here.
I
Like you
like this.
said, last year they won 64 games. Previous year, one more than that. I don't think the drop off is going to be that substantial, right? Like I said, they're a worse team than last year in terms of proven talent. But if the upside swings pay off, then I think
Mhm.
this could be a much better team. Come the regular season and the postseason as well. They could just be a better team in general. So I'm going to take the over here. I think Shea is going to pop off as usual. I think
Yeah.
hopefully J-Dub will be healthy. That should translate
Mhm.
to maybe a few more wins. And then, hopefully Chet also gets better as well alongside, the plethora of talent that they've added to this roster. So, maybe like a
Well,
slight over, like
yeah.
61 or 62 games, something like that.
Yeah. Well, you heard what they said, right? Like they're like, oh man, people were saying they were better without J Dub last year because they won quote unquote more games with him. But obviously, like you said, a healthy J Dub makes them better,
Oh, yeah.
especially in the post.
Yeah.
So we don't.
Because he was
So
battling so much. That's why it's
yeah,
like I don't want to
hamstring.
put an asterisk on his season, but you kind of
Right.
have to with all those how banged
Yeah.
up he was from top to bottom.
I'm really hopeful that that was just kind of a fluky just weird year just because they had just gone to the playoffs and
Right.
back-to-back years, deep a ton of games played. So I'm hopeful that this is not a reoccurring thing because
Yeah.
if it is reoccurring, that's going to be rough. So for the young guys that they brought in terms of like the popping element, so which guys are you probably the highest on of their young players that could potentially just come in and actually help them win games right away? To help
Um,
contribute to that over.
in terms of like the draft, like the guys they brought in from the draft.
Yeah, or like even some of the guys who were already there, but like
Mhm.
they've had barely played, like say like even like a Topic or a
Yeah,
Sorber
yeah.
or one of those guys.
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's between probably Topic or Sturts.
Okay.
Just because, ball handlers, and I think, that's gonna help because roles have shifted here now, right? Because there's no more Lou Dort, there's no more Isaiah Joe, there's no more Aaron Wiggins. But now it's gonna be Jared McCain. It's gonna be guys like Topic as well. And then I don't know, it's interesting. So I guess like the key here is development, but we haven't really seen Topic. Sturts is going
Yeah.
to be a rookie.
And some of that's
Um,
out of his control. A lot of that was out of his
all
control.
of it,
So I mean,
all of it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
um,
torn ACL and then the cancer thing.
right. So yeah, I'd probably go with maybe Jared McCain and Sturts.
Okay.
Yeah, and obviously Topic as well. But I'm putting a
Mhm.
huge asterisk there just because, like, we haven't
Yeah,
seen him play at all. But
yeah. He
those are the
played
guys
like
I expect to pop off. And then like you have
yeah.
AJ Mitchell off. Like I said, there's still depth there, but roles have just changed because Wallace is
Yeah.
going to be a starter now, I would assume. Then, you have
Mhm.
Caruso being a sixth man, Jared McCain, AJ Mitchell, Nikola Topic. So, and then Mara being kind of like the 12th man, I guess.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and Topic played in 10 games last season, 5 points, 4.5 assists, and 16 minutes a game.
right.
Like I said, only 10 games. So, and I don't think we saw him yeah, he played 9 games in the playoffs, but like 2 minutes. So basically like garbage time. So we really didn't see much of him at all. And like I said, that's why I'm curious about these guards because that's going to bring, like I said, more of an offensive speed element to their game and playmaking, right? Like even a guy like an AJ Mitchell, right, where last season he goes from 17 minutes a game to 26 minutes a game, puts up 14 and 4, and kind of is a guy where like he's just relentless attacking the basket, right? Like he's a downhill guy, right? And OKC didn't have a lot of those type of guys outside of J Dub because even Shea, right, is a lot more comfortable, as like a mid range guy. Not that he can't drive to the basket, but just the way he attacks the basket is different from like an AJ Mitchell where it feels a lot more forceful, right? Just with in terms of like I said, just the size and the strength, right? It's a little bit different from how a guy like a Shea attack. So I'm very curious to see their offensive output. Kaysen Wallace being brought up over Lou Dort. What are we looking for there from him? Because he was a guy where I remember at the end of that series, he was kind of something along the lines of like, yeah, I really liked this role that I was in, right? Where it's like now I'm playing a bigger role, more minutes, starting potentially, and having an increased role on the offensive end of the floor rather than like, okay, you're coming off the bench and just kind of like you're the POA guy,
Right.
right? And occasionally you might close games, but then other times you're not going to close games. But now it's like there were a lot of games where he would close over Dort, especially if Dort just didn't have it at all in the postseason.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's taking the combined role now of Isaiah Joe and Lou Dort, right? Of being one of those knockdown shooters in the starting lineup, while also being one of, if not their best perimeter defender in that regard. So he's going to be very switchable, probably going to be guarding the best backcourt player, while also being a very, very valuable piece of their offense. Because if he's not hitting his shots, then it's going to kind of collapse and fall on J Dub and Shea to create, on other levels of the floor. So I think his role is huge, and that's probably going to be the swing piece on how successful their season is as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, like you're essentially moving on from Lou Dort to
Mm-hmm.
give more opportunities to Casey Wallace, and so far he's been a very productive player, just not a huge part of their offensive attack, right? Like he can handle the ball a little bit, occasionally attack, he can hit a spot up three, but we don't usually see him quite as involved on the offensive end. So now he should probably be like a 30-minute a game guy if he's going to be in the starting lineup. And I'm curious to see, if that impacts OKC's defense at all. Because again, you're going from like a bigger, more physical defender to now a guy who's a little bit smaller, but faster on
Sure.
that end. Right. And also like probably a little bit more, I don't know, in terms of like putting the ball on the floor and making decisions. He's probably better at that than Lou Dort.
Oh,
Right. Like,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and he
yeah.
can he
So
can he can score at all three levels. That's the cool part. So, I think his offensive game will be unlocked if they give him more opportunities.
yeah, so and this is kind of what we expected at a certain point from Oklahoma City, right? Like we kind of thought that like okay, a guy like Lou Dort could be gone, right? Like or somebody of that ilk, right? Where it's like okay, this is kind of the plan. They have all these picks, they're going to accumulate assets, bring in guys and then move other guys around but keep the core guys intact so that way they can still win games with their main guys and just get players around them. That's kind of what they have to do now. It just probably came faster than we expected, right? Because the rise was so quick. And obviously, it's not, I'm not saying they're like falling, but it's just now there's an adjustment period where it's like, okay, now the Spurs are here. So now we got to find a way to combat that. And I think they can. It's not like they can never beat San Antonio. They almost did it in the postseason after losing the regular season series. Um, what was it like 4-1 or whatever it was? So it's so I guess the question is like should OKC be viewed as the favorites next season? That would probably be the final
Mm,
question for this discussion because right now they're definitely viewed as one of the three best teams, but should they be the favorites?
no. I
Okay.
think I think like you said, their best team doesn't necessarily equal like championship title and
Mhm.
definitely does not equal best odds for sure. So I don't know cuz it's tough. I don't want to say New York cuz I
Mhm.
don't think they have what it takes to go back to back. Um but then like I don't know, you look around and it might be Oklahoma City, but I just think I think they're the best team. I don't have them as the favorite to win the title though. I can't pick them.
Right. Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to that point yet. But yeah, it is kind of interesting as of right now. Like they share the same title odds with San Antonio. They're both plus 270. So basically, they're kind of like where we're at, where it's like, yeah, they're pretty much right there. Then the Knicks and Philly are third and fourth, but they're tied at plus 900. So essentially, it's kind of the thought process of like, okay, OKC and San Antonio are probably your two best teams. Take your pick in terms of which one you think is better, right? Like last year, we picked OKC to beat San Antonio. I think we had them. I think you had them in 6, I had them in 7, but we both picked them to win. They lost in 7, but could they bounce back this year and beat San Antonio? So, do you foresee at least a scenario where they can beat the Spurs?
Yeah, 100%. But
Okay.
I don't know if that translates to a title. They could get back to the finals for sure. I have
Right.
no doubt about that. I just don't know. It depends on who they're facing. Like if they're facing Philly, I'm taking Philly over them.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess if you
Because
got
here's the thing. If Philly gets
yeah,
to the finals, then that's a version of Philly we've never seen. That means Embiid
right,
is fully healthy. That means Jalen
yeah,
Brown is popping off. That means Maxi's
right,
unguardable. That means VJ's doing his thing, and LeBron is doing his thing. So
yeah,
that's an unbeatable team
right.
in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair. Where it's like, okay, if Philly got that far, then that means like everything is working for them. Like
Yep.
you said, like they're at full strength. They don't really have any injuries. Everything's working out in year one,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, so like that's a fair point. So and obviously we'll get to them once we get to their off season. But right now this is OKC discussion. So yeah, like pretty much case for optimism. They have a bunch of young guys. They should still get better, even after they got kicked out of the playoffs by San Antonio. They should still be a tough out. Then the potential road for pessimism could be what if those guys don't pop? So like if those young guys aren't quite there, which we've seen from these other teams that made that bet, that's where you could potentially have some problems. But the good news is you still have the top guys. You still have the top end talent where ultimately in the playoffs, a lot of it will come down to can those three guys get it done in a playoff series again? Because we saw them do it the title run, and then we didn't really get to see it last year because J Dub was hurt, and then Chet fell off a cliff against the Spurs. So that's what I'm banking on. I'm banking on for them, like worst case scenario, even if the young guys don't pop, I'm just banking on natural progression from like Chet and J-Dub and all these other guys like Cason Wallace, AJ Mitchell, and everyone else, and they should still be one of the 3 teams to beat, right? Like if they're not in the Western Conference Finals, something went wrong, right? That's to me the baseline level for them from here on out, right? And only a handful of teams I would probably like give that title to, right?
I
Where
agree.
it's like if you don't make the conference finals, like your season went wrong, off the rails.
I agree with you.
So yeah, so um, so leave a thought in the comments in terms of like what you all think of the offseason. But yeah, that pretty much concludes this episode of the Off Ball Takes podcast. So as I said already before, leave a comment to tell us what you thought of OKC's offseason and whether or not you think that they're back in it in terms of should they be the favorites or not. Questions about Chet, questions about even like a Shea, which we didn't even talk about a whole lot. And then of course, if you want to join in on that at the OBT podcast for more content and updates. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We appreciate all the support. See you next time.